All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special end of 2024 presentation, whether you are watching the recording or you are attending live. Hope you all had a good Christmas time. Mine went smoothly. Kids got lots of gifts. It was good. Food was good. Family was all right. All nice. And I hope you're strapped in because this is going to be quite an ambitious presentation. Before we start, I'd like to add a comment. It's kind of strange, surprising for me, the people who find the website Dream Sanctuary. It's because I've never promoted it. I've always been focused on making content or taking care of my kids, doing something else. I've never really had the time to make it into a big public endeavor. So I suppose it says a lot about you if you found that website. It's quite confidential. So it's almost like the content reached you before I made it public. And this presentation is kind of like that as well. If you watch it early or if you're attending, it's quite special, the content of it. So if you found this early, well, it says something about your character, also about your development as an individual. And for the people who are attending this live, this is a big leap forward for me. And so I just want you to know that your presence means a lot to me. It really does. Okay. And with that, we're going to go into the presentation. There we go. All right. So today we're going to unveil a new direction. I guess I'm going to have first to introduce myself. So my name is Axel Perrichou. I'm not going to introduce myself the usual way. If you want to have some biographical detail, I refer you to this article, How I Learned Dream Analysis. That's the first article I've written on my website. There's anything, every time there's a slide with something on the top right corner, is because I wrote an article about it. So you can go on my website and learn more about this. So the way I'm going to present myself is more about how I see the world. What's my worldview like? It's made of three different facets. First one is phenomenology, second one is existentialism, and the third one is either symbolism, depth psychology, or analytical psychology. It's psychologically informed symbolism, something like this. So how does this work? I would say first and foremost, I'm a phenomenologist, which means I accept reality as it is handed to me. I accept experience as it comes to me, especially unusual experiences. So if I have a terrible nightmare, I have to contend with that. If I'm bombarded by synchronicities, I have to contend with that. If I had a plan in my mind and everything went south, I have to contend with the fact that reality is moving a different way than what I planned in my mind. So that's what phenomenology means to me. I accept unusual experiences, I deal with reality, and I'm not really interested in the causal pathway. Why did it happen? I really focus on the experience itself. This ties into existentialism. And existentialism is more about how do I live with those unusual experiences? How do I extract some actionable insight out of them? How do I live with the fact that this is my life and this is the reality that I am with? How do I embody this knowledge that this is my life? And the third part is symbolism of analytical psychology, is because most of those unusual experiences I found cannot be understood anyway else than going through the symbol. So if I have a dream, I have to go through the symbol. Here's an example. You have a dream about losing teeth. Well, you can't understand that biologically. You can't go to the dentist. That's not how it works. You have to understand the symbol of teeth and you have to understand the symbol of losing teeth. So this third facet is about how to extract meaning out of those unusual experiences. So you have to go through the symbol and then you have to relate it to the individual psychology. So yeah, that's how I see the world. I don't know how many people can relate to this way of seeing things. It's definitely empirical, but it's not scientific in the way people use the word scientific. It's not materialistic. It's not grounded in biology, though those aspects matters. It's just not grounded in that. It's not grounded in metaphysics either. I'm not good with metaphysics. I would say that this worldview has come as a necessity on how to deal with all the stuff that has happened to me. So that's how you could describe my website, is trying to communicate this way of being, this way of looking at things to the reader. That's one way to describe it. Now I've started that website 4 years ago and I've got quite a few articles. And I guess if we're going to summarize and try to get the most important point, the careful reader will see that I'm always circling around a topic. It's not like I'm writing the same article again and again. That's not exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm always writing articles out of the same concern. It's always there, and you should be able to pick up on that. And that concern, if I can reveal it, is the transition from Pisces to Aquarius. I am extremely concerned about this transition. I don't think it's something to celebrate. I don't think it's something to be joyous about. It's going to bring an amount of pain and suffering that people do not realize how intense it's going to be. So why am I saying this? Well, I'm saying this because I see myself as a kind of a guinea pig. I would say I'm a willing individual, and I've done all the study and all the inner work I could do to help this process. And if I look back on what has happened to me, I don't know how I made it in one piece. I just don't know. It has costed me pretty much everything. I live on the other side of the planet. I've lost physical contact with my family, though we can still see each other when they travel to Australia, or we can keep in touch online. I don't have any contact with my old friends. I've lost a good career, at least a good potential career. And honestly, I don't even know who I am these days. Sometimes I have to pause myself and say, oh yeah, this has happened to me. This has happened to me. This has happened to me. Oh, I'm not that person I was a few years ago. I'm not that person I was 6 months ago. And so I'm not exactly sure who I am as of today because it's so much to integrate. And as someone who, who has done this struggle voluntarily, then I ask myself, what's going to happen to the collective who has no idea what's happening, or maybe no interest, or maybe is not as voluntary as me, is not as willing to, spend as much time or effort as I did. So this is the place from which my concerns come from. It was very difficult for me, and what's going to be for others. You could say that this new direction that we're going to take is a new iteration on how to deal with this problem of transition of the ages. And so let's summarize some key points. The part one, and yes, we're going to go straight into the big stuff, a change in the God image. This is going to upset people, and it should, because what I've done is I've read Carl Jung's Ion, which is not an easy book to read. It's not an easy book to understand. And I've distilled something into an article, and and I'm going to distill this article into a few slides. So it's hyper condensed, and I'm not sure how people should react if this is your first exposure to the topic. If this is too much to you, just pause the video, go do something else, come back or do not, whatever. What I'm trying to say is don't shoot the messenger. These aren't really my ideas. I'm presenting them. Okay, so what do we see in this painting? What we see in this painting at the top is the Virgin Mary being crowned in heaven. That's the coronation of the Virgin. So what is going on here? In 1950, Pope Pius XII defined ex cathedra the dogma of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm quoting, We pronounce, declare, and define it to be a divinely revealed dogma that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever Virgin Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. And he has done this under the dogma of papal infallibility, which means that when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, he is preserved from the possibility of error on doctrine. Okay, so we have to accept that statement. This is dogma, this is the direction of religious tradition. But what does it mean? Let's turn to Jung. The Assumption and Coronation of Mary, as depicted in the medieval illustrations, add a fourth feminine principle to the masculine trinity. The result is a quaternity, which forms a real and not merely postulated symbol of totality. The totality of the Trinity is a mere postulate, for outside it stands the autonomous and eternal adversary, with his core of fallen angels and the denizen of hell. Okay, so if we look at this image, we have a Trinity, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is a masculine symbol. Some people argue about the gender of the Holy Spirit. The point remains, this is a masculine symbol. And now we have the addition of a feminine principle into this Trinity. So we have the motif of the 3 plus 1. When we get a quaternity, the fourth one is always much different from the 3 first. All right, so what does that mean? What does it mean? If the God image, which was masculine up to now, is being introduced a feminine principle, that means it's starting to be both. There's a pair of opposites that is now in tension or trying to seek resolution. That's the first pair of opposite, masculine and feminine. The second pair of opposite is because the Virgin is accepted into heaven, so the Virgin is accepted into the domain of spirit, let's say, but because it's Mary, she's linked with the element of the feminine and it's linked with the element of matter. So that's the second pair of opposite that's trying to be reconciled. It's spirit and matter. And there's a third pair of opposite, which this is because the feminine is close to the dark element, darkness. And so there's an element of darkness that is considered evil. So it's not evil in its totality, but it's a certain dimension of evil that is starting to come forward into the wholeness of the quaternity. So the addition of the fourth, the feminine principle into the 3 constellates 3 opposites, pairs of opposites, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, and good and evil. That's what we are forced to accept under the dogma of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now we're pretty much at the level just beyond metaphysics, because we are at the level of the religious and the level of symbolism. For me, as someone who experienced some of it, I have an image to propose to you. This is not metaphysics, this is a functional image. So let's look at this. I believe this might be a bit too choppy on the screen sharing. I might have to edit this a bit later. But you should see something. The first thing you should see is a 3 plus 1, and that feminine character is haloed. So once again, this is not metaphysics, this is a functional image. And this is our experience, this change in the God image. And I've put this under an article which is called the Solar Feminine. This is probably the most important article I've written. And I wrote it at the absolute limit of my knowledge at the time, so I'm going to try to explain it again. Here's a quote. The unconscious has now the ascendancy over the all-dominant of consciousness, best described as the Trinitarian Christian worldview, which has the opportunity of being renewed into a quaternity. Okay, so this is how it is. I feel like my Trinitarian consciousness, this triangle, is surrounded by all part from a feminine principle that is haloed. And that haloed is a kind of a, I don't know, holy or saintly thing. So I feel like I'm contained into something much larger than the worldview that I've inherited just by being born in this culture. And this is what's likely going to happen to other people. Your assumptions about life will be strongly challenged by contents coming from the unconscious. And most of the times, the will simply not work. I'm going to give you a few examples. So let's say you want to go somewhere, and that day, your car doesn't start. It was working yesterday, and it's going to work the next day, but that day, the car doesn't work. You can't go there. Okay, that's strange. I don't know, you order something online, and it never comes in the mail, even when you reorder. That's strange too, because usually it works. Or maybe you read something online, and then it shows up on social media, and then a friend talks to you about it, and then you read a book and it's there. It just keeps reappearing like this. Like, what is going on? Well, this is this condition, which I've titled the solar feminine. This is how I experience things. So the solar feminine means the unconscious, because the masculine is traditionally linked with consciousness. So the unconscious is now solar, which means that it has a stronger influence on the experience of consciousness than the will of the ego. So once again, if I refer to the picture, this is me, this triangle, it's my worldview, and I'm always being interfered positively or negatively by a greater principle than the will, by the way the ego works. I'm surrounded on all parts, and sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes it's very difficult to live. So that's what I mean by the solar feminine. This is this condition that's happening in every single individual, or at least it has the potential to start for each and every individual. And it's very intense, it's very disorientating. It takes a time to adapt to that. I don't know if you can adapt to it, but I will say you can adapt to that. People who have read this article has misunderstood it. They think that I'm saying women will become solar, and that's not true. The solar feminine is a condition that's happening in men and women. It's happening in me, it's happening in women. But it is possible that women will shoot up harder than men. And the reason for that is there has been this clinical observation by people who work in the field of depth psychology that women are closer to the unconscious than men. I don't really have an opinion about that. This is a clinical observation that people have made. So it is possible that it's going to be stronger in women than in men. I've rewritten this article from a different perspective. This article is named Grieving the Father. It's quite one of the important ones. And if there's a change in the God image, if the Trinity is turning into quaternity, there's an astonishing grieving process that has to take place. Why? Because traditional certainty is being challenged. Here's a quote. The acute recognition that tradition cannot provide any answer towards the problems of the opposites leaves us with the dismal necessity that a new religious development is required once again. Say this Trinitarian God image, the Christian dominant of consciousness, this worldview we've inherited from the Middle Ages and earlier, obviously, it's aging, it's kind of done for, or at the very least, it's seeking renewal into a quaternity, as we've seen from the dogma of the Assumption. And this article was my attempt to make a grieving process for this change. I've done my best to outline the change and how I react to it. And now there's some people who are going to say, look, I don't accept what Jung has written. I don't know why I should accept what you've written because you're influenced by Jung. And fair enough. Now I invite you to go to the movies and watch Megalopolis by Francis Ford Coppola. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about without the religious framing. What you'll find is two people fighting for the future of New Rome. One of them is a kind of traditional mayor. His name's Cicero, and here you can see he's stranded by the sense of time. And the other one is Caesar, is a visionary architect, and he want to re-envision the future. And the question that is asked in the movie is, who is going to lead? And do people have what it takes to go into an unknown future? Or would they rather stay into the known and all its problems? So that's what the movie is presenting, this tension between the visionary new and the traditional functional old. And what's going to happen? Are they going to be reconciled? I think the movie responds to this question admirably. I'm not going to spoil it, but that's what you will find. You will find this conflict between, let's say, the old mode of consciousness and the new mode of consciousness on screen. It's very interesting to watch. Okay, so now I suppose this is a good summary slide. What we are doing here is we are in search of a mature religious attitude under a new God image, how to relate to the transcendental, what transcend the ego. And so the old God image was Trinitarian. It was Piscean from the age of Pisces, and it's best represented by the Abrahamic religions. The new God image is Quaternarian, so it's a quaternity. It's Aquarian, so it's coming from the age of Aquarius. And it's best represented, I would say, as of today, maybe by the numinosum or maybe by the unconscious. And I've put on the bottom left a schematic that's from Jung's Ion. Way too complicated to explain, but you can get a sense that it's a 4x4 structure. Okay, I suppose I should spend a bit more time on the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius now. So I hope everybody here knows what an astrological age is, or Platonic month. So when the sun goes through the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac, it spans around 2000 years for each signs. So it spent 2000 years in Taurus, then it spent 2000 years in Aries, so it would come up here. Then it would spend 2000 years in Pisces, and then it would spend 2000 years in Aquarius until it loops. Now, if you look at the age of Pisces, so it started in 0 AD, and you should be able to see that it's split into two fishes. There's a vertical fish, and that's going to delineate the first half of the age of Pisces, and then there's a horizontal fish, which is going to delineate the second half of the age of Pisces. So for the first 1000 years, the age is going to be, has been influenced by the vertical fish, which has been identified with the spiritual principle, and it's been identified with Christ. If you're not convinced how a fish would be identified with Christ, I refer you to this symbol, the Christian fish symbol. That's the ictus, and there's an acronym in it which says Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. So here we have a pretty interesting correlation between the astrological age and the religious symbolism. This is called astrotheology. It's how the astrological age influences religious symbolism. So that would be the first half of the age of Pisces and the second half of the age of Pisces, leading into the more or less the year 2000 would be influenced by the horizontal fish. That's the principle of matter, and that's has been identified with the opposite of Christ. So that's the Antichrist. Let's look at what Jung has written on the topic. He wrote the Platonic month of the fishes is to be ruled by two principles. One is Christ and the other one is Antichrist. That is to say, the fishes will rule this world and subdue it by working astrologically through man and molding his consciousness. The two fishes represent the driving forces of the newly arisen world of consciousness. Okay, so if you understand this point, it means that through 1,000 years, the experience of consciousness is going to be forcefully put into the side of spiritual development, and then the next 1,000 years will be forcefully put into the side of material development. And this is really positive. Why? Because it gives emancipation from both. Now we know what spirit is, we know what matter is. Ego consciousness has gained a greater discernment, and it has gained a greater autonomy on those opposites. But here's the problem. This has been done to such a point that now the opposites cannot be reconciled. They're in violent polarization between each other. We don't know how to deal with something like spirit and matter at the same time. And if you're not convinced by the violence of this polarization, go into politics and tell me how easy it is to stand between the left and the right. This is totally a byproduct of the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces is split into two fishes, and so at the end of the age of Pisces, we've inherited the problem of the opposites. And how deep is this problem? It's at least as deep as the astrological age, but it runs deeper. In Edward Edinger has written this quote: "The basic issue in Ion is the double or bipolar nature of the Christian God image." So the problem of the opposite reaches further than the astrological age, it reaches straight into the God image. So that means that the whole tradition that exists under the Christian God image suffers from the problem of the opposites, what we've seen before. This is going to be very difficult because as we leave Pisces and we move into Aquarius, we're going to see that the approach of the next Platonic month, namely Aquarius, will constellate the problem of the union of opposites. It will then no longer be possible to write off evil as the mere privation of good. Its real existence will have to be recognized. This problem can be solved neither by philosophy, nor by economics, nor by politics, but only by the individual human being. Well, that's a tall order. The problem of the opposite is such that it cannot be reconciled only by the individual existence. And this is what the age of Aquarius is going to constellate. So we are leaving Pisces, following the ecliptic. So that's the trajectory of the sun through the zodiac. We're first going to reach the water of the Aquarius, and then we're going to go through the water bearer. Aquarius means water bearer. So what does it mean to go into the age of Aquarius? There is this monumental quote at the end of Edward Edinger's book, The Ion Lectures. I'm quoting, "And if my reading of the symbolism is correct, the Aeon of Aquarius is going to generate individual water carriers. And the numinous reality of the psyche is no longer going to be carried by religious communities, by the church, the synagogue, or the mosque, but instead it's going to be carried by conscious individuals." And this is the idea that Jung puts forward in his notion of a continuing incarnation. The idea is that individuals are to become incarnating vessels of the Holy Spirit on an ongoing basis. Right, well, that's a lot to stomach. I'm going to try to reframe that quote so that people understand. So we're leaving Pisces and we've constellated the opposite. We're approaching Aquarius and we have the problem of union of opposites. Jung tells us that this problem cannot be solved by communities, only by the individual existence. That means that the individual is forced to live between opposites, such as spirit and matter, good and evil, masculine and feminine. This is so difficult that it will require the help of a third and of an advocate. That's the other name for the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, the advocate. And so when an individual can stand in the middle of the opposite and thrive, he embodies this spirit that is able to reconcile opposite. That's what it means. He becomes an incarnating vessel of the Holy Spirit. And for me, the Holy Spirit is mostly the unconscious. When you do that, you achieve what is hinted by the age of Aquarius, to become an individual water carrier. So you carry your own water, just like the symbol of Aquarius does. Okay. I suppose now people understand better this slide and why I would be so concerned about this transition. This is a tall order to move from communities into individual existence and having to reconcile the opposite at an individual level up to becoming a vessel for that principle. Let's move into the second part. If the God image is going to change, then what is going to happen to the Abrahamic religion? We can ask that question. And we're going to focus on Christianity here. To answer that question, I'm going to introduce an oversimplification. I'm going to introduce the Apollonian on the right and Dionysian divide. And the simplification I'm going to make is I'm going to say that Christianity belongs to the Apollonian. It's identified with the Apollonian principle. It's not fully true. There are mystical elements in Christianity that are Dionysian. I suppose if you read someone like Meister Eckhart, you'll get it. But in general terms, it is more true to identify Christianity with the Apollonian principle than with the Dionysian. And I'm not the first one to make that case. Camille Paglia has written that much of Western culture can be understood as a complicated interplay and struggle between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. She associates Apollonian with rationality, celibacy, intellectualism, restraint, and goal-oriented progress. The Dionysian or Chthonian is associated with irrationality, ecstasy, ignorance, anti-intellectualism, sloth, sexual indulgence, and unrestrained procreation. We all have our way to understand the Apollonian-Dionysian divide. At the simplest level, Apollonian is order, Dionysian is chaos. Here's an interesting point. Her theory is this. Dionysus is identification, Apollo is objectification. Here is the point. Paglia associates Dionysian principles with pagan religions and Apollonian principles with Judeo-Christianity. Okay, so if the God image is going to change, if we're changing from Pisces to Aquarius, and tradition cannot help us, we have to ask a very difficult question is, what could be missing from Christianity for this religion to survive the transition of the ages? So what is missing in Christianity for it to survive? And my candidate is that Christianity is too Apollonian, it has suppressed the Dionysian too much, and that's where we need to look at. So when I'm opening the door to the Dionysian, I'm not doing this from an adversarial manner or from trying to undo Christianity or deconstruct Christianity. No, none of that. I'm trying to strengthen Christianity in a difficult time. Something is missing and we can probably add it as a compensation so that it could adapt. I suppose not many people will understand that, so I'm going to move into a quote from Jung. In Psychology and Alchemy, he's working on the dream, and this is what he writes. It therefore fits in very well with the purpose of the dream to attempt a combination of Christian and Dionysian religious ideas. Evidently, this is to come about without the one excluding the other, without any values being destroyed. This is extremely important since the reconstruction of the gibbon is to take place in the sacred precincts. Such a sacrilege might easily lead to the dangerous supposition that the leftward movement is a diabolica force and the gibbon the devil, for the devil is in fact regarded as the ape of God. The leftward movement would then be a perversion of divine truth for the purpose of setting up his black majesty in place of God. But the unconscious has no such blasphemous intentions. It is only trying to restore the lost Dionysus, who is somehow lacking in modern men, pace Nietzsche, to the world of religion. Well, here you have the thing. When I open the door, when I do this leftward movement and ask the question, what is missing in Christianity? I don't do it out of trying to, a satanic intention. That's not what I'm doing. I'm saying there's a compensation that needs to take place, and the Dionysian is probably the most substantial candidate for being reintroduced to the world of religion. And now I can already imagine people screaming that the Dionysian is dangerous, and you don't need to convince me of that. Let's go through some quotes. The Dionysian is the horror of the annihilation of the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation, and at the same time, rapturous delight in its destruction. Man's individuality is entirely obliterated. Man is no longer the artist, he has become the work of art, which means that the creative dynamism, libido in its instinctive form, takes possession of the individual as though he were an object and uses him as a tool or as an expression of itself. Thus, in the Dionysian state, the Greek was anything but a work of art. On the contrary, he was gripped by his own barbarian nature, robbed of his individuality, dissolved into collective components, made one with the collective unconscious through the surrender of his individual aims, and one with the genius of the race, even with nature herself. He is nothing but sheer nature, unbridled, a raging torrent, not even an animal that is restricted to itself and the laws of its being. The point here is that the Dionysian can go too far, easily go too far. In fact, the whole Greek culture, which was exemplifying the Dionysian, was not done well. It was done in a barbaric manner. It was done in a bestial form. So bestial is the worst sense of animal. And it was a total horror, actually. And if you're not convinced of this, I'm going to turn to Heraclitus, who has noticed this in his fragments. For if it were not to Dionysus that they made a procession and sang the shameful phallic hymn, they would be acting most shamelessly. But Hades is the same as Dionysus, in whose honor they go mad and keep the feast of the wine wets. So if there's one thing you want to memorize about this second part, is that I make a distinction between the Dionysian that goes too far, the Dionysian as Hades, and the virtuous Dionysian, the Dionysian as Dionysus. So this is what Heraclitus has noticed. There's the Dionysian as Hades, and I want to stand for the Dionysian as Dionysus. See, when I use the word Dionysian, probably something goes through your mind like excess, but that's not what I mean. I mean something else. And sure, I get it. You know, this distinction is probably a lost battle. Heraclitus wrote this, what, 2,500 years ago? And this is likely has never entered collective consciousness. And using that word is just going to add confusion. So this is something I have to work with. You'll see. So let's put them side by side. We put the Apollonian or the Christian on one side and the Dionysian on the other side. So if the Apollonian principle is the basis for individuality, you have virtues like self-restraint, not going with the first impulse, delaying gratification. All that is good in my book. If you take this a bit too far, you go into asceticism. Asceticism is fine as long as it's temporary. Fasting is good. Taking breaks away from stress and technology, it's all good, but it needs to be temporary. If this goes too far, it becomes chronic, you enter a state that I would call world renunciation. So it's not the same to go into a 10-day spiritual retreat and enter a monastery for life. That's world renunciation. They're not the same. And sure, I get it. There's positive aspect to entering a monastery for life. I just would not recommend that to the population at large. Only specific individual will benefit from that. So the Apollonian side can go too far. Same thing with the Dionysian, which you could see as pure affectivity. Affectivity is those overwhelming emotional reaction, something that kind of possess you. And we've seen that when it goes too far, it becomes the annihilation of the principle of individuation. The person loses its whole identity, kind of becomes fully dissolved into something else. Usually what people understand by Dionysian is intoxication. And in my book, intoxication is fine as long as it's temporary. What I mean by that is, I don't know, if you, binge watch a TV series, if you lose yourself into a book, into a video game, that's fine. If you go into a sports event, or I don't know, if you go into a concert and you become one with the crowd and you sing the lyrics with everybody, that's a state of intoxication. And in my sense, there's nothing truly wrong with that as long as it's contained in a certain duration. You go into the show and you go out of the show, and it's only during the show that you experience this. And there's an interesting observation by Paglia, is that she says that when the Apollonians kind of objectification. So I don't know, a vow of celibacy, that's Apollonian. It's objectification because it's almost like you have an idea and you use it to frame the world. So I would say that the Apollonian is kind of possession by an idea, especially when it goes too far. And the Dionysian is more like, I don't know, chronic gambling. Let's take that. That's totally Dionysian in its extreme. And it's identification, because gambling becomes the entirety of your personality. So you're possessed by the affect of gambling. You become one with gambling. And so when the Dionysian goes too far, is you're possessed by an affect. You become identified with it. So we see an interesting opposite between possession by an idea and possession by an affect. An affect, once again, is an overwhelming emotional reaction. And now I'm going to ask you a tough question. What is the virtuous Dionysian? Because for most people, the Dionysian means this dimension: excess, intoxication, rapturous delight. And for me, that's the Dionysian as Hades. I'm interested in this direction, the Dionysian as Dionysus. And I don't think there's a word for it. I genuinely could not come with a word for it, and I've been preparing this presentation and thinking about that, but I can't come up with a word, but I can give you an example. And the example I'm going to take is this one. It's when touch becomes a caress. So everybody knows how to touch, but for touch to become caress, you have to let go of self-control, and you have to lean in a very measured manner into what nature can do for you and what the body wants to do. You have to slightly, paradoxically, like lose control to kind of gain a different aspect of reality. You lean into nature and you're not fully into the possessiveness of consciousness. So that would be an example of the virtuous Dionysian, is when touch acquires this magical quality of caress. That would be a candidate for it. But anyway, the confusion is so great that I love this word, but I'm going to have to ban it from my vocabulary, or use it as little as possible within the confine of what I want to do. This confusion is too great. The word Dionysian will always mean excess. This is not what I'm about. And yet, here we are. We're moving into part 3. Part 3 is going to be quick. We're going to talk about symbolic and archetypal affects. For this, we need to watch this short video, and I'll comment on it later. It's around 1 minute.
私のセクシャルマイノリティの部類はフィクトセクシャルっていうものに分類されるみたいですね。
どうか幸せは喜びを共に分かち合い、悲しみや苦しみは共に乗り越え、お互いを尊敬し、永遠に愛することを誓います。
私にとっての初音ミクっていうのはただの好きなキャラクターっていうよりも私を救ってくれた人です。
まずは神道からご神父へとお伺いしております。ご神父三深美さんからご神道明彦さんへとお願いいたします。
結婚式挙げるまでキスしたことなかったんですよ。
恋愛の意を込めてウェディングキスをどうぞ。
All right, so when I watch something like this, I'm split. There's something beautiful about this, and there's something terrible. When I look at this Japanese man marrying his doll, from the lens of symbolism, I see something beautiful. He's not marrying a doll. He's marrying a psychic content that's hanging onto the doll. We call that a projection. And for people who are familiar with Jung's work, what he's marrying as psychic content is the anima. This man is in front of everybody wedding the anima. And it's kind of beautiful. But then, once again, I drop the lens and I look at it, and I'm kind of horrified, because he's doing this in a total state of unconsciousness. At least I would argue so. He's doing this in a state of participation mystique. That's the word that Jung uses. And participation mystique is when you have an object and a subject so the individual and the symbol, and they're tied by a partial identity, a relationship, a kind of mystical connection. They're one with each other. There's no distinction between them. I mean, if you look at the doll, you don't see anything, but he sees his wife or something like this, the partner he wants to marry. So that's he's inside this state of projection and is acting out the pattern of wedding the anima is in a full state of participation mystique. This special phenomenological trait or this special relationship, this special mystical union, I would call that a passion if I was from Orthodox Christianity. But I'm going to call that an affect. And because it's an affect directed towards a symbol, I'm going to call that a symbolic affect. And because we're dealing with the anima, I'm going to title this an archetypal affect. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an affect of an archetypal nature. And let's just stop here and see how powerful this thing is. It has extracted him from normal life, from all common sense. This person is living something else, he's living a pattern, he's living a mystical union, but is not fully in real life. And so I'm not a romantic Jungian. I know how important archetypes are. I know you can't really live without a relationship to them, but this is something I've learned from Robert Moore. They're dangerous. They have a destructive side. They can be seductive, so blindly compelling. You almost can't resist them. And they're imperialistic, which means that the archetypal affects can direct and possess consciousness. So yeah, I have my distrust, I have my reservation. I don't consider that, archetypal energies are only good. This is an example of something that has gone a bit wrong. He's acting out a pattern, that's good. I'm not too sure he's acting this out the right way. If he should be working on that relationship and retrieving the projection. That's what he should be able to do. Okay. And so this doll, you shouldn't see just the doll as a symbol. You should see the doll as a totem. A totem is kind of a primordial sacred emblems whose mere presence or contemplation catalyze the transformation of consciousness. And I've seen that in Christianity. I was at the church and they brought out the icons and people rushed to those icons, fell on their knees and started praying intensely as if the sacred just entered the room. And I was kind of alienated by that because I did not feel this attraction towards the icon. I did not understand what was going on. But now I get it because I understand that this icon was a totem and its presence liberated psychic energy and it consolated this relationship, this affect between the subject and the symbol. This affect is usually manageable, but as we discuss, all hell breaks loose when there is an archetypal affect, when this magnetic attraction becomes an archetypal affect. This is why totems, or the concept of totems, are important to understand, because they put people in a state of participation mystique. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the Dionysian going too far. There's an identification that takes place, and we lose the ego. And it's never good when we lose the ego, because the ego is the center of consciousness. And so if we dissolve into something else, you've lost the individual and its capacity to regulate his own existence. Okay, finally, there we are, part 4, responding to the problems of the times. We've seen 3 points. 1, there's a change in the God image. Okay. Second, something must be added in compensation to the Christian religious attitude. It's too Apollonian. And 3, because of the unconscious contents coming into consciousness, there's going to be a great deal of problems dealing with symbols. We need a kind of a psychologically informed literacy about symbols and what it does to the psyche. To respond to those 3 problems, my dream sanctuary is taking a new identity. And after 4 years, drum roll, here it is. I'm unveiling it. So that's going to be the symbol made by my wife, Thank you very much. I love this dearly. I enjoy looking at it. I think it conveys what I want to do, and I've titled it Dionysophy. And sorry, Greek people, we're going to pronounce this the American way, Dionysus, Sophie, Dionysophy. And now I can present Dionysophy to you. So Dionysophy is the study of affective disturbances through their symbolic dimension. Here's an example, a well-known example. Let's say we deal with a chronic alcoholic. So we're not going to take the biological route of addiction. We're going to go through the symbol of alcohol, and alcohol means spirit. So the chronic alcoholic is trying to access spirit through matter. He's trying to consume spirit because he cannot get it anywhere else. So that's an example of Dionysophy. We understand the symbol, we understand the affective relationship, and we understand what the person is at and what he needs. We don't go through the biology, though the biology is definitely important. Another way to define Dionysophy would be it's the discovery of the individual through its totemic symbols. So if we look at our Japanese man, we see his anima, we see him. Okay, we know where he's at. The doll is the anima and he's trying to marry him. And so we know what kind of process has taken possession of him. Which means that if he's suffering from a kind of compulsion towards a symbol, because some people do suffer from that, then we can try to work with an integrative process and we can try to humanize those archetypal affects. So we're going to go through a process of recollection of those affects, those passions, through the careful scrutiny of wisdom, usually what is brought by the unconscious. So this is what Dionysophy is claiming to be. If you practice Dionysophy, you become a Dionysophian. That's a bit difficult to pronounce, but I don't know, I like it. Okay, if this is Dionysophy, first question that should come up is what is the difference between Dionysophy and analytical psychology? And yes, I used analytical psychology, not Jungian psychology, because Jungian psychology put the emphasis on Jung, analytical psychology put the emphasis on the unconscious. I much prefer that. If you go to an analyst for an analysis, he's going to have to understand the entirety of who you are. Everything that you've lived, childhood, parents, your dreams, the entirety of your being is going to have to be laid out in the open. And you will have to do that while kind of discussing Jung's work. And so analysis is, given the scope of such a endeavor, analysis will take many years. There's no way around this. Just reading Jung will take you 10 years. So if you go to an analyst and he has to discover the entirety of who you are with his help, that's decades of work. I mean, it can become decades of work. Dreaming is a lifelong habit. So, let's say years of work. So I'm not really interested in that. This is very cumbersome. I'm more interested in something like internal family system, which gives you guidelines to access the psyche, access parts of the psyche, and work with complexes, and experience the healing of the reintegration process fairly quickly. I guess in 1 hour, you can understand the internal family system. And if you're willing, the process can be pretty quick and pretty efficient. I think this is important because we are in an urgent situation. We don't have years and years for each individuals. So that's the first stream that is influencing Dionysophy. And there's a second stream which comes from Christianity. Now, I'm going to have to limit what I'm saying here. I'm interested in Christianity from the standpoint of the religious attitude. I'm not very good in metaphysics. I don't claim to know the entire tradition. I don't think it's possible for an individual to understand the entirety of Christianity. But when I look from my standpoint to the religious attitude, what Christianity has achieved to this day, I've got no query with it. I don't have any problem with it. So I'm gonna work with that. And if I have not shocked enough people by now, I want to deal with the total Christian Weltanschauung, so the entirety of the Christian worldview, and that requires taking seriously alchemy and taking seriously Christianity's hated brother, Gnosticism. So I'm going to take seriously those three when I'm working with the religious attitude. So that's the two streams that informs Dionysophy. And I suppose I should make something clear here. Most people start a movement because there's a lack. They want to do something different. And it's not exactly my case here. I'm claiming explicitly continuity with Jung's work in Christianity. Why? Because I see an entire corpus of things and I want to specialize in a certain layer. Another way to frame that is the ground has moved because of the God image, and I want to address this change. But I'm not rejecting that, or I'm not putting myself in opposition. From what I've read of Jung, there's nothing I disagree with. There's a lot of things I don't understand, but not much I disagree with. And once again, for Christianity, it's the same. There's not much I'm opposed to. There's grievances, but there's also a 2,000 years history. There's the violence of the human condition. All of that I can understand. I don't have a revenge against Christianity myself. And last but not least, yes, I kept this for the end, Dionysophy will have to deal with sexuality, because we're going to deal with symbols, and sexuality is the strongest instinct. Therefore, it's going to have the strongest symbols. Here's a quote by Jung. In the ancient cults, the experience of union with God was understood in antiquity as a more or less concrete coitus. Okay, so a spiritual experience is seen as a symbol of coitus. Why? It is primarily a question of primitive instinctuality, of insufficiently differentiated libido, which prefers to take a sexual form. So the libido loves to take a sexual form to convey meaning. If you have dreams, you know what I'm talking about. You've probably seen them. But we can go through all kinds of artifacts. Here's the winged phallus of Pompeii. So we have animal legs, so that's an instinctual part. We have wings, so that's a spiritual or pneumatic dimension. And we have obviously the phallus, so that's the generating principle. It's erect, so it's kind of ready. So what we're seeing here is something like the libido in its creative or generative aspect. It has a fertilizing spiritual power. You can't reduce a symbol like this to biological reproduction. That's not what we're dealing with. It has a psychic dimension, and it must be understood like that. And if you're not convinced that Dionysophy can deal with sexuality, here's something to think about. Dionysophy will approach fetishes as totems. I'm going to let you think about this because this is a huge endeavor. There's a lot of work to do at that level. So there we are. Here's the website, dionysophy.earth. It has a few tabs: home, about has a small essay, projects, that's what I'm going to try to do, contact if you want to send me something, an email, and community. Community requires a bit of time, so I'll start with the bad news. It's going to be a paid membership. Sure, there's a free tier. So Dream Sanctuary will always remain free. That's a website for kind of posterity. That's how I see it. But there's also going to be some content that I'm going to make freely available. I want to make a podcast, like an archive of interpreted dreams, and make it available for free. That would be great. But if you want to access the community, you have to subscribe to the membership, and this costs money. The reason is simple. This puts a lot of stress on me. In fact, when I started this project of Dionysophy, an old back pain came back, and I've engaged with the pain and tried to see what was behind it. And yes, it has to do with this project. So the stress on me needs to be kind of reciprocated by a stress on you. And this is going to give me leverage for me to bring this project forward. So what can you expect from the community? Well, there's a whole social aspect, a chat, a way to interact with people who's interested with that. And there's going to be a monthly gathering, this kind of presentation where I'm going to push the envelope. I'm going to refine what Dionysophy is. So this is what you can expect. I'm starting this project, tonight, tomorrow, and I'm going to need to find my marks. I want to produce more content than just a monthly gathering. I just need to get into the rhythm and see how I want to do that stuff. There is a good news, however, and that good news is that there's going to be a free trial. So if you click on subscribe quarterly and you enter Dionysophy quarter, you get 3 months free. This is valid until the 1st of February. And after that, you have to subscribe monthly. You enter Dionysophy month and you get a free month. And the reason is simple. There's not really content on the website right now. I have to produce it. I've got a bunch of ideas. This is something I have to refine and make available to the public. All right. And that's it. 4 years of my life summarized in 1 hour. I suppose this is completely impossible to digest, but this is all the knowledge you require to understand why I'm coming with something like Dionysophy. I'm going to open now the floor for discussion. Any kind of sharing, comment, question, as long as it's on topic, it's welcome. Remember, this is going to be recorded. I'm not sure I'm going to publish it, but yeah. I'm going to start by stop the screen sharing. And there you go. Okay, so that was a lot. Anyone want to say something?
Well, first of all, congratulations for your project.
Thanks.
And really wish you the best of luck with it. Let's see. I was a little bit astonished by how how similar it was to what I'm finding myself working on or occupied with, like the ideas. You probably already could guess that because we discussed a little bit in chat topics of that nature. Yeah, so it's very cool. Really wish you the best of luck with it, and I can relate to it very much.
Yeah, like I feel when I came up with the name, I feel the momentum behind it. It's huge. This is how I feel. I don't know how objective I am, I don't know it's possible, but I'm like, wow, this is waiting to break through, and it's going to break through me, which means I'm going to constellate a kind of problematic, and then people probably going to work on that on their own. This ideally this is going to be a set of tools for people to understand their own condition. That's how it should be in an ideal manner. I'm not claiming ownership, I'm claiming continuity. I see myself as part of this trajectory of I don't know how you call that. I guess I can use that religious development. I understand religion a bit differently than other people. For me, it's the relationship between the ego and what transcends the ego. And I don't really deal with metaphysics, as I said. So yeah, there's the necessity of this. I feel the pull, I feel the push. I feel there's really like something to work there. And it's intensely engaging for me. This is not something I get bored of. I actually get excited about the idea of working those things. Yeah, it's going to be something I will have to refine and make sure I communicate to other people so that they can, work with that. That's the goal.
Yeah. How effective do you think something like that could be in comparison to analytical psychology? So you said that analytical psychology will take a few decades in order to get anything from it. Why? And when something like that also aims to penetrate something very deeply, why do you think it will be effective as a short term, in a shorter time period?
Yeah, so let's say someone comes to me with a special kind of suffering, saying like, I understood your work. I'm suffering from, I cannot get away from a symbol, right? And he's really suffering from that. His life is forced by the compulsion towards the symbol. Well, then we have a specific set of problems, and with a specific set of problems, we can usually work kind of like in internal family system. We can work on that and see what happens. So I have the good hope that it is possible to solve this kind of specific type of suffering of people who are forced, like they cannot get away from certain symbols. They're really suffering from that. The reason I emphasize the word suffering is because if you are enamored by the identification, there's nothing you can do. This condition is so strong, there's nothing you can do. The person has to somehow say, like, this isn't fully me, and this is why I can't own my life because of this problem. So probably, with the generation of image of AI, with people who, get like fall in love with fictional characters, all the problems around sexuality, like fetishes are totems, that's a specific set of problems the person can come with, and I don't have to open the entirety of that person. I can go work at that level, hopefully, and that person can experience what is happening and therefore experience a kind of healing. Because for me, healing is clarity over your own circumstances. That's the real healing, is like, oh, I finally get why this is happening to me. Whereas if you go into analytical psychology, well, the first thing you have to deal with is the analyst. So that creates transference issues, unavoidable. IFS is pretty good at avoiding transference issues. And then the second thing is, well, the person comes to you and they will tell you something generic like, I'm depressed, I have no meaning in life. Then you have to open the whole person. That takes a lot of time. Working through dreams, how long it is? Yeah, that's not easy. So that's the thing. The person should come with a specific problem, a specific symbol, and you should be able to get somewhere in, a single session. Best case scenario.
And can you elaborate just a little bit about how Christianity, the Christian framework, plays into it?
Yeah, the Christian framework is this kind of virtuous attitude that you need to have towards what transcends the ego. So, for instance, a Christian person fully understands something like the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Like, that is something I can take on board. If you're not afraid of what can happen when you at the mercy of the unconscious, of the numinosum, good luck, So there's a certain character that has been formed by Christianity. They can ask those questions. Something happened to them. It's like, maybe God put me in that situation. They know how to ask that question. Most people can't ask that question. They're like, maybe God wants something from me. They're usually not very good at answering that question, but they know how to ask this kind of, there's something else that's asking something out of me. And that plays very well into the development of the individual, because the unconscious asks something from the ego. And therefore, we work always with two centers, right? There's the ego who's struggling and the unconscious that kind of wants its own direction. And we try to align those. So the Christian attitude is perfect to build the kind of relationship you need to the unconscious, but it needs a bit of adaptation on the sense of letting a bit, not suppressing as strongly the Dionysian, or at least the virtuous Dionysian.
So you mentioned the phallic symbol earlier with the winged phallus. And Jung also had a dream about that. I think he mentioned in his autobiography, where he was going to a basement, to an underground basement, and he saw this huge tree trunk which had a skin, something like that, and he wrote that he later learned that it was basically a phallic symbol. You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know that's his first kind of important dream.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a man-eater in that dream. I don't fully remember the
Yeah.
dream.
Yeah. Man
And
eater.
there's the phallic symbol and the man-eater. And the way I understand a dream like this is there's a component of the unconscious that can eat man if man's will is not oriented well. So if your will is misfires, then you summon this kind of man eater, and it kind of devours the will, and it subdues man. Like this is the experience of the unconscious, right? You want to do something, and reality says no, or you don't want to do something, and it keeps pushing you one way. So that's the man eater and the phallic symbol. This dream has been identified by someone that symbol as Dionysus. I've wrote in one of my on the article on my website that there's one guy that has figured out that actually this symbol, this man eater, is actually Dionysus, and everybody was shocked because no one saw it until him. And the way I understand that is that the unconscious work closely with this Dionysian principle, right? So yeah, that's how I see it. It's almost like the delivery mechanism of the unconscious is through the eros, but this the kind of the Dionysian dimension, right? So the unconscious, when it wants to transmit something, is not through logos, but it's through eros, and it does it lunging into the Dionysian. So that's kind of how I understand a dream like this. So Jung was the first one to deal with that, and I mean, he worked with that. We don't really know what has become of that dream. But yeah, the first dream that you can remember, that's pretty important. The childhood dream, that pretty much maps the first half of your life. Yeah.
Mm. So maybe let's talk about like Peter Kingsley.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, what I got from his book Catafalque is that we are basically should be engaging in a collective grieving process right now
Yeah.
at these times, and that we are not yet really in the Aquarian age, and we're really only halfway in the transition there.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering where do you see yourself and your project with regards to where you stand on the point on this transition. Do you try to do something like Catafalque to help grieve and heal the passing of the age, or do you see yourself as past the Abrahamic age and you're trying to sow the seeds for a new age?
Yeah, the article Grieving the Father is me kind of picking on Nietzsche's God is Dead, right? And by that I mean the development of humanity is losing touch with the God as defined by the Abrahamic religion. So Nietzsche started the announcement. I see CATAFALQUE as the second announcement, where he says that, it's over, like Western civilization is over. And on my Grieving the article, I repeat that, we're done for, but we haven't grieved, we haven't understood. We're kind of like zombies, right? We live with assumptions of the past, and things are moving below us, and everything's crumbling around, and no one understands because the age has moved. Stuff has moved, and we've not adapted to the age. And the best adaptation process, I agree with Peter Kingsley on that end, is that grief, because grief is coming to terms with an end, and it's life affirming to grieve, because we realize our condition when we grieve. So I've done that article to kind of help that process, laid out what I consider is the appropriate understanding and the appropriate material to start this grieving process. I can't do a grieving process for people. But yeah, ideally there should be a collective process about grieving that. I haven't seen it. And where I stand is I consider, compared to the average person, I've done the bulk of that grieving process. And I'm kind of at the beginning, at the breakthrough of the age of Aquarius. So a process, something like Dionysophy will show all the traits that I'm anticipating from the age of Aquarius. It will have all of that. It's going to be a bunch of stuff, and it's going to continue the trajectory of the Abrahamic religion through analytical psychology. So I see myself as trying to push forward that, but I've also worked on the grieving aspect. But it depends on the individual. Some people haven't even started this. In fact, they've kind of they're still trying to find their roots into traditionalism, which is important. You have to find your roots. But if the age change, the roots will not help. You need different tools. And so my website and this presentation is trying to give the kind of understanding to people to go through this transition. A concept like the solar feminine is meant to help the person to understand what's going on, why the will doesn't work. Well, that's because the unconscious is surrounding the person on all sides, and it wants you to, it has its demands, right? The unconscious has its demands, and the more the ego refuses it, the more difficult the situation can become. So I'm trying to throw some tools that I've used, but it's a kind of, at the end of the day, it's the person who has to own their own life. There's not much I can do.
Okay. I'm interested about what you think, again, about Peter Kingsley, some of the things he said. So he was very critical about Jungians, right? He really went off on them in CATAFALQUE.
Yeah.
Basically dismissed everything good that they tried to do. So, like, for example, he writes in his Book of Life, whatever we wisely do with our enlightened works and finest actions to improve our situation will only make it worse, far worse. The best of intentions are futile when we have tossed away the key to our reality into the darkness. That's the quote. It's in page 83. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what do you think about, what you're doing in relation to that. And I'm not saying it to imply criticism. I'm saying it because, like, with a quote like that, when I want to do stuff, I'm like skeptical of
Yeah.
what value it's going to have.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, like, how you view it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get what I'm
Yeah, I
getting at?
understand. So Dream Sanctuary is my thing, right? It's the 4 years I've trained myself to kind of only select ideas that won't go away, right? I'm not writing out of, oh, I've got an idea. It's more like, I can't get away from this. And I write an article and I kind of discover what I'm doing as I write the article. So, and I believe that when you read my website, you'll find that there's something surprising. And that surprise is actually the same surprise I experience when I write the article. There's something new, there's something fresh. But this was kind of at a personal level. With this thing, I feel like I'm taking on something that's collective. So it's not exactly my intention as such. It's kind of like something that's guided, necessary, and it has to kind of, I'm kind of the lens on which everything is crystallized. So I'm not important as such. I don't see myself as being important. This is not my attention. It's coming through me, and it's going to spread away from me. I'm a focus point for a light ray. And when I look at, I also distrust what goes through my mind space. If I have a good idea, that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Some good ideas go nowhere. But I'm testing this with the unconscious, and the unconscious wants me to go there. I've tracked my dreams. I've done some session of active imagination, which I will likely reveal behind the membership. But I can tell that straight to the camera. I'm the right person to do this. I have the certainty of it because it has showed up in my dreams. It has showed up in session of active imagination. I have the right skill set for it. I don't know exactly what is it about me that's so special, but I'm the right person to carry that project forward. I'm convinced of that. This is not an idea. This is what has come to me and what I conclude out of my own situation. I feel kind of blinded with the ability of judging myself. I suppose you experienced that. You probably don't trust your intentions. You don't trust your ideas and stuff like this. But when you have a push like this, oh man, if I don't do that, I'm not too sure who can. It's carrying me forward. And so I can't really resist it. It's better like I go with it. So there's a collective dimension to what I'm doing. It's not just me and my goal. In fact, I don't really know what I'm doing. By that I mean in 6 months I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know. I don't have a plan in mind of like, oh, step 1, step 2, step 3. It doesn't work like that. I'm engaged into the flow of energy that the word Dionysophy carry, and I'm going to have to refine that, communicate that, interact with people, and I'll make sure that the dreams I have guide me on what mistakes not to do.
Yeah, good answer.
So unless someone want to add something, I'm going to close the video soon, and I might edit some part and I will publish it on the YouTube channel. Here we go. So thank you everyone for your time and your attention. I know I'm asking a lot out of people with a project like this, and I hope that if you can extend your trust and goodwill to me, I will be able to do my best. That doesn't mean being perfect. That means putting my best foot forward. That's what I'm going to try to do. So Happy New Year, everybody. Take care. And for the new members, see you inside the website. Bye.